In a moment now, I'll be recording. Okay, so good morning, everyone. So our discussion or our topic will be the education paradigm shift. So as we all know that the education is now shifting from lesson objectives now into course outcomes. So from content into outcomes, from sa una nga teacher centered, now we are student centered. So the course outcomes of this subject is explain how the change of emphasis from content to outcomes in education led to the shift of focus in teaching from the subject matter to the learner, and then differentiate the underlying principles between program outcomes and student learning outcomes through specific and concrete examples of assessment. So these are the course outcomes, the outcomes of the entire program, the subject, which is assessment in learning. So we will gonna dissect them one by one, and we will be discussing the intended learning outcomes of this course. So the first one is the introduction. So the advent of technology caused a change of perspective in education, nationally and internationally. The teacher ceased to be the sole source of knowledge. With knowledge expulsion, students are surrounded with various sources of facts and information accessible through user-friendly technology. Teacher has become a facilitator of knowledge who assists in the organization, interpretation, and validation of acquired facts and information. So remember that traditional method, the teacher should know everything. The teacher may or may not be bookish, pero sila ang sources of information and they spoon-fed everything to the students. But now, uh, teachers are only facilitators. We will gonna facilitate, kamu soon to be teachers, you will be facilitating the students on how they will get acquainted with the new lesson that they will be facing. So, dili na to sa una nga dapat tudluan nato siya unsaon unsaon pag kaon sa isda, unsaon paghimay-himay sa isda. Tudluan nato sila unsaon pagpangisda mismo so that they will gonna learn on their own. So now I have here a picture which I had also posted in the Odilo platform. Now my question is, what can you say about this picture? The next is, how do you relate this to the concept of objectives? Then what is the teacher's role on objective setting? Then comment on the Peter Hall principle. If you don't know where you are going, you'd probably end up somewhere else. So this is the time that I'll be asking you to unmute yourselves, then try to answer those questions. So again, the questions are, let's start with, what can you say about this picture? Sige, who will try to answer? I'm gonna call somebody. Let's have the fifth person on my list. We have Mayin Munares. Will you try to give your insights? Anyway, there's no right or wrong answer in this question. What can you say about this picture? Mayin? Shall you unmute yourself?
Sir, hinay ka YouTube signal si Mayin sa ilaha.
Okay. O sige, ikaw may nag-unmute. Sige, Daryl na lang. Daryl?
Ala sir, nagmahay ko nga kung i-unmute.
Sige.
Okay na, sir.
Okay. Daryl lang, no? Daryl lang.
Si Mayin ako sa...
Mayin. Okay na, Mayin. Mayin. Sige, Mayin.
Daryl to. Okay, so so the question is, what can I say about the picture?
Yes.
So dark shows um, just like
Pwede naman Bisaya.
okay lang Bisaya, sir. Okay
Okay
lang
naman
Bisaya,
Bisaya.
sir.
Sige.
So, kanang same as kanang kita as kanang educators, same as the dart, we must kanang point through to something nga kinahanglan mo based sa atong or somehow sa atong goals, like what we have right now, education. So ang education karon is new normal. That's why it takes a hard time to kanang set something that is basically kanang ma what do you mean to say? Kanang literally ma-focus dyan ni Sir ba, but through what we have right now, online education. So pwede nailay mga bases like mediums atong magamit in educating or pursuing education. So mora na ako, sir.
Okay. So, thank you so much, Mayin. Sige. So, now, yung nang giigo, no, what can you say about this picture and how do you relate this to the concept of objectives? So, as we all know, kita karon na naman to sa new normal. So, remember that the teaching, before ka mo start sa atong teaching, you should have objectives. Diba? We have the three domains, the psychomotor, the cognitive, and the affective domains. So muna siya lesson objective sa una. But the problem now is it is different. Kasi sa una objective ramang good nga. For example, ang objective na ako, 'di ba? When we create lesson plan, at the end of the day, 80% of the students must be able to kanang get a satisfactory rating or solve blah 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 kana siya. Kutubra dira. Pero karon, it is now outcomes based. Dapat unsay impact once they get this. What can they learn in getting this? It's not up to how to catch a fish. I am teaching you how to catch a fish, but you have to learn what can you do with the fish that you had caught. So tanan nga nakuha nimo nga mga isda unsay imong angay buhaton. So that is the outcomes. So if you want to sell it, it's up to you. If you want to cook it, it's up to you. So that's the outcomes. So gikan sa pagkahibaw nimo, the objective is only dapat makatun mo unsaon pag kuha og isda. But the outcomes is what can you do sa mga nakuha ni mga isda. So I hope nakuha ninyo ang concept. Sa una ang objectives dira ra kutob kung unsa ang mahitabo inside the four corners of the classroom. But the outcomes is the thing that will gonna happen after getting the objective, after attaining the objective. So those are the outcomes. Muna karon outcomes-based education ta. So outcomes-based education. So naarabad yun na siya sa inyong board exam. So I hope nga ma-inculcate na in your minds nga dili lang takutob sa objectives karon kundi moabot ta sa outcomes. So what is the teacher's role on objective setting? Now remember, just like your objective is to hit the bullseye. You hit the center. You hit the center so that you will gain a better score. Now, if you will not be able to hit the center, you might be hitting mas layo kaysa sa center. You might be hitting nearer than the center. But if you will gonna hit the center, then you will gonna say that you have attained the objective. Na, so kung 80% sa mga nitira anang dart sa dartboard kay nakahit sa bullseye, then you will gonna say nga nakuha na niya, na-attain na nimo ang imuhang objectives. So now, if you don't know where you are going, you'd probably end up somewhere else. Kaya ba budget ka kung asa ka pa dong? Now, the same way with your case, you are enrolled in BTLED, and the other section is enrolled in BEd. But the question is, do you know where you are going? Education ang inyong gikuha kurso, nga naman unsay gusto ninyo mahitabo? Magtudlo ba jud mo og secondary or magtudlo ba jud mo og elementary, or starting is moadto mo sa lain nga field, like for example kanang BPO, di ba? BPO. So wala na ko gidegrade ang BPO. In fact, makatabang ang BPO in enhancing your communication skills. But the question is, are you really happy nga mauna ang imuhang objective? Kung mauna imuhang objective, then that's good. But if it's not your objective, karon pa lang gani at your second year, di mo sure sa kurso nga inyong gikuha, then you'd probably end up somewhere else. Kung wala kay direction sa muhang padulong, you will end up somewhere else. So the same way with what my our principal in high school had taught to us. The same way in getting a score when you have an exam. It's better to aim high and miss the mark rather than aiming low than hit it. So mas maayo pang mo aim ka og high na may tag akong score karon is 95 or higher out of 100 items. You aim high and miss the mark, you got 94 or 93. Then aiming low, ngamingon ka, makapasar lang ko 75, then hit it and you got 75. So muna ha, it's better to aim high and miss the mark rather than aiming low then hit it. So those are the things that you have to remember. Ang nakalisod na ba sa assessment in student learning, especially other professional subjects nga sa board exam, there is no distinct questions that will gonna come up in the board exam. It's more on situational. So it's something that you have to learn within. Unya kaning among gitudlo ninyo, these are just kanang facilitating nga mga concepts nga ma-learn nimo, unya dapat ma-conceptualize nimo ikaw ra. Kay bawo ka unsi sakto, kay bawo ka og sayop. Unya pagkahuman dapat kamao ka mo diskarte. Kay sometimes sa questions sa board exam, ang mga questions is ang kanang libog kaayo, unya ang choices puro sakto. Choose the best. Okay, now what is outcome? So I have mentioned kanina outcomes-based education. What is outcomes, by the way? So outcome, an end product or a result of the entire learning experience of the student. So, unsa may nakatunan nimo in the whole semester? So, outcomes na siya. Getting a better grade is an objective. But the learning nga imuhang nakuha is an outcome. Mobitaw na nga, maingon ko nga, mas maayo pa nga gagmay kag score, basta kay ang imuhang score, imuhang kaugalingong pinaning kamutan. Because that is outcomes. But when you are an objective-driven student, you will gonna do anything else to get a higher score. We value, as a student, no, sometimes we value the score than the learning. And that is the problem in education. So, muna, ika-board exam, nakalimutan nato ang uban concepts. Na naman, we copied from our seatmates. We copied from our classmates. Mubitaw na nga, usahay makabantay ta, sa ato ang kaugalingon mismo, pansiron tag essay, mamasa sa ta sa answer sa uban. Basahon nato nya manguha tag idea usapat ta mo answer og atoa. So that is an objective driven student. So if you are an outcomes based driven student, then you should try to answer on your own. Okay raman sad nga mo tanaw ka sa answer sa uban, but better to have it tried it yourself first before you see the answers of others. Lahi tong sa una nga mo answer sa ta sa uban usa pa ta mo mo kopya sa data sa uban, mo basa sa ta sa uban usa ta mo answer ug atua. So that's the difference between the two. So what is an outcomes-based education? Outcomes-based education is a framework that focuses and organizes everything in the educational system around what is essential for all students to be able to successfully at the end of their learning experience. So, as what I told you, mag-focus siya sa estudyante mismo. Dili siya kung unsay kuha sa unsay lesson nga i-discuss sa teacher. Nga dapat mingon ang teacher sa una, dapat mahuman jud ni nato class no kay ngano kanang mura ba jud ni coverage nato sa ato ang finals. Mura ba jud ni coverage nato sa ato ang midterm. Mo na siya sa una ang objective driven. Our objective is to cover up everything. But now that's different. Outcomes-based education. Kung wa na sabtan sa estudyante, you reteach, you redo, and you give re-examination if wala nakasabot ang mga estudyante. Pero kung nasabtan na gali sa mga estudyante, you continue with the other lesson. But the problem is, tungod kay kinopya ang answer, dagko og scores daan. Mauto na si teacher nga wa kahibaw mo continue sa new lesson kay pagtuon niya nakuha na sa tanan. So muna siya difference. Soon you will be teachers and you should know these things. So muna mutiman-an jud na nato. Okay, two types of outcomes, intermediate outcomes and deferred outcomes. So what is an intermediate outcomes? So intermediate outcomes are those outcomes that will come, these are referred to as instructional outcomes or competencies and skills that graduates have achieved after finishing either a program, course, or learning outcomes. Immediate siya nga makatunan. Like, gitudluan ka unsa ang pagpangisda, kahibaw dayon ka. Muna siya, paghuman sa discussion, paghuman sa tudlo, kahibaw na ka. But the other type of outcomes is deferred outcomes. So deferred outcomes are those abilities, competencies, or skills that the graduates may have achieved or acquired several years after completing the degree or program. So, kung gitudloan kay pagpangisda karon, unya magliso jud kapag maayo, di nimo makatunan, pero makatunan ra niyan ani mo sa umaab. So those are deferred outcomes. So skills and competencies that the graduates may have achieved or acquired several years after completing the degree. So kung gitudluan ka sa imong teacher sa concept sa math nga, ang addition di ay dili ra siya one apple plus one apple equals 2 apples. E moram na imuhang nakatunan, paghimo nagbanana, wa na, nayabo na. Pero after years naka-realize ka, hala, 1 apple plus 1 apple is equal to apples. Ay, 1 banana plus 1 banana is equal to bananas, di ay no. So, yung ana gani dugay nimo na sabtan, yung mao din ang konsepto. So that is deferred outcomes. So dugay siya na learn. Okay. Next are the levels of outcomes-based education. So, institutional outcomes. So, ato ning himay yung tagsa-tagsa. So, the levels of outcomes-based education. Remember that success in the implementation of outcomes-based education lies in the clear alignment of the institutional program, course, learning, and assessment goals. Therefore, it is necessary that these OBE levels must be consistent with one another. Moingon galita consistent with one another. kung maingon ka nga, like for example, objectives na to sa una, no? Kung maghimo tag lesson, the students must be able to define what is sana siya, what is sana, enumerate what are the branches of science. So dapat sa examination nimo enumeration. O yung ka define the branches of science, dapat sa examination nimo definition. O yung ka classify the branches of science according to their own definition. Then dapat sa imong examination, classification such as multiple choice or kanang sana siya, matching type. So dapat yung wala naon nimo. So identify, dapat identification. Dapat kung unsay exam nimo naka-base siya sa ato ang lesson objective. So I guess gipabuhat na mog lesson plan sa uban ninyo nga course subjects, the subject teachers. Now, if dili bag-o sa inyo ang lesson plan, dapat tan-awon ninyo unsay course objectives ninyo mo align siya sa imuhang exam. Kay dili mahimo nga magbuhat-buhat na kay exam, mag-multiple choice ka dira, unya din ang naa dito sa imuhang babaw, definition. Dili pwede. Ngano, sir, pwede, dili pwede, sir, ngayon ani, kanang, which of the following is the definition of kanang zoology? A, blah, 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 blah. B, blah, blah, blah. Multiple choice siya, pero definition type siya. No, dili siya pwede. Nga naman, definition type of question is higher order thinking skills. And remember that multiple choice is only simple knowledge. So katurang kuan cognitive ra nga level. Wala dito wala dito ang application, wala dito ang synthesis, which is definition na adira dapita. Nasa synthesis. Ano naman, you have to synthesize everything. You have to summarize everything. So dapat tan-awon sa nimo ang level sa imuhang kanang gibuhat nga exam o level sa imong gibuhat nga objective. Magtakdo ba sila? Kay niingon gud siya, clear alignment of the institutional program, course, learning, and assessment goals. Kana siya tanan nakalinya na. Di na pwede nga nag-definition ka niya pag-abot diri kay kanang enumeration. Di na pwede. Diba? Define blah blah blah. Yung pagkahuman exam nimo enumeration. So dili na siya pwede. Kung may kada sa math side, for example, gipabuhat mo lesson plan, the students must be able to solve word problems for addition. Yung pagkahuman, imong gibutang dito 2 plus 2. Diba? It's not a word problem. Dapat word problem, mingon ka nga kanang Josie has 20 apples. Yung pagkahuman, Maria has 23 apples. How many apples do they have? Ngun ana siya nga level, dapat word problem siya. So, muna siya ato ang basihan. Ang objective nato naka-align so that later on, kana siyang objective will become an outcome as a whole. Man, nakaagi naman kuan ni sa eskwelahan. Nga kani di ay kuan, kani di ay pagtimbang nato sa bugas, pwede di ay nga kanang kinilo di ay ang gamit, di ay kinamot. So muna siya dapat masabtan nato. Okay, next is, so what is the first type? Institutional. Institutional outcomes are statements that express what the graduates of a certain institution are expected to become after graduation. So it is supposed that any educational institution will have set their expectations from their graduates. That is why these institutions create their mission vision. Mission statements serve as the institutional guidepost. So these statements dictate all other plans and activities. So kana institutional. Klaro kayo no, unsay example ani institutional? Our mission and vision. Nya, naabi ato, ambot lang ka memorize ba mo? A premier multidisciplinary kato siya. Amo tay ato ang vision. Then na po yung mission. So muna siya example sa ato ang institutional outcomes. Next is the program outcomes. So program outcomes, well, the institutional outcomes are the bigger statements of the entire institution. Klaro kayo, in the entire institution's expectation from all their graduates, regardless of degree programs. The program outcomes are specific to the particular degree. So, kung ang institutional sa tibuok eskwelahan, the program outcomes sa atuang degree program. BTLED ka na kay kaugalingon nga program outcomes. Kanang sa syllabus, kung kita na mo porma sa syllabus namo, kanang naay PO. PO1, PO2, PO3. So kana siya program outcomes na siya. Lahi-lahi ang program outcomes sa BEd, lahi-lahi ang program outcomes sa BTLEd, pero naay pare-pareha kanang core nga PO na to. Pareha na siya, pero mag-differ na specialized. Kay TLE man mo niya ang BEd, kay elementary education man siya, though kanang kung ano sa nailahang kuan GE, General Education Content, GEC. Okay, so muna siya. Lahi po ng HM, degree program. Okay, now, course outcome. Course or subject. Dili ni ang kurso ha. Kundi, the course outcome is the outcome of the subject. So, kung naatay mission vision, institutional. Kung naatay subject nga kanang kung naatay degree like BTLED, mo to siya program outcomes. Kung unsay outcomes sa BTLED. Kung naatay subject sa BTLED like kani assessment in student learning, this is course outcomes. So course outcomes ni siya ha. So mo to akong gi-examples na, diba, subject ani assessment in student learning, o tanawa course outcomes. Outcomes ra ni siya outcomes ra ni sila sa subject nga assessment in learning 1. So course outcomes siya, dili siya institutional outcome, dili siya program outcome. Kay daghan man kayong BTLED kani para ra ni siya sa subject nato, gitawag og course outcome. Kay usahay ang masikyat man gud sa uban, ang tawag kuno sa course outcome kay para sa kurso, dili. Program outcomes ang para sa kurso. Institutional outcomes ang para sa tibok eskwelahan. Okay. Next is learning outcomes. So, learning outcomes or instructional outcomes, these are statements that explain what the students can do after specific or topic. So, in every course outcome, nasa na siya gitawag na itong intended learning outcomes. Na naay naka-align ani niya unsa ang specific nga outcomes. So mao to ang kadtong objectives nato. Like for example, magbuhat ta og natay ko course outcome sa ato ang usa ka subject. So himay-himayon to siya og lain-lain nga mga intended learning outcomes. So kanang intended learning outcomes mo na siya ang as a whole semester mo create og course outcomes. Kana tanan course outcomes sa lain-lain nga subject as a whole mo create og program outcomes. Kanang tibuok program outcomes as a whole mo create og institutional outcomes. So I guess kuanra klaro raman siguro. Now, the last slide. Now, characteristics of OBE. So the characteristics of OBE is or are first, student-centered. So, student-centered. Everything that is done in an institution or in a classroom would always put the students at the center of the entire learning process. Kamo ang amuang clientele, kamo ang amuang gisiguro. So, dili tungod kay new normal na ta, unya pagkahuman, dili na lang sa ta mag-discuss no kay wala na ikuan, internet connection, ang data, tungod kay para man sa inyo ha. Muna nga nangita mi paagi. Kita tanan naglisod aning new normal jud. Kita tanan naglisod. So dili kamo lang. So mao na para sa inyo haning nga focus. Kay kani ang among gipampalit nga mga gadgets karon, kani mong gipampalit personal man namo para lang jud makat-on mo o para mas klaro ang amo ang delivery sa inyo ha. Diba? So pakpakan ako kagalingon oy. Okay, now focus should be on what the students are expected to know and do. Therefore, learning activities have to be designed in a way that these expected outcomes are achieved. Okay, next is faculty driven. Teachers take on different roles as they design teaching learning activities that are unique to a specific learning outcome. Some of these roles, to mention a few, may be teachers being facilitator, a mentor, a trainer, a demonstrator, whichever is appropriate for the particular learning outcome. So, kani akong gibuhat karon, I am just facilitating to you. I am just mentoring you. But it's up to you whether you have to absorb them and you have to inculcate them into your mind so that in the near future you can use these concepts. Okay, next is meaningful. Okay, last is meaningful. OB teachers are reflective of their entire teaching process because they make use of any data or information they could collect about their students in designing succeeding teaching, learning, and or assessment activities. So, kami dili mi manggod mag agad og usa ra ka teaching activities nga among buhaton. Daghan makadepende sad na kung paspas ba ang catch up sa mga estudyante o unsay paminaw namo nga okay para sa mga estudyante. So in assessing students' achievements, teachers are constantly guided by checking the constructive alignment among learning outcomes. So teaching learning activities and assessment activities. Also, teachers make use of clear assessment criteria in measuring students' outputs or outcomes. The assessment criteria are provided to the students before they are engaged in the activities so that they are informed on the expectations set by the teachers from them. Example, kung maghatag galit ang role playing, dapat ihatag na ko ninyo unsay mga criteria. Unsa man, the proper gesture, the proper posture, the voice quality. So kana siya, ihatag na nako ninyo. Unya dayon pagkahuman expression. Then dapat ako na ihatag niyo daan para aware mo asa dapita ko makakuha o kuan dako nga puntos. Diba? So ana siya ang kuan kanang idea so that the discussion should be meaningful. Okay, next or last will be the 4 operating principles of OBE by Spady. So according to Spady, if these 4 operating principles are followed consistently, magpadayon, by the educators and academic leaders, the implementation of OBE could be a success. Number 1, clarity of focus. All educators must be aware of outcomes of each student and be able to translate this at the classroom level while being guided by the higher outcomes such as the program and institutional levels. Also, in achieving the classroom level outcomes, teachers must refer to the learning outcomes so that appropriate assessment tasks and teaching learning activities are consciously designed. These align is called constructive alignment. So kato kong gisulti ganina. Dapat ang teacher kahibaw unsa ibuta nga kuan kanang objective, unsa nga intended learning outcomes. So kana siya unya pagkahuman dapat ni align siya sa kadtong gibuta nga course learning outcome, ni align pud siya ngadto sa program outcomes, ni align siya sa institutional outcomes. So dapat mo align siya tanan para kana ang activity is correctly designed. Nya then nindot jud. Kay remember, accredited biya ta ako AACCUP, meaning at the same time ISO accredited ta. So meaning we are internationally kuan kanang sa tawag ani acknowledge na king eskwelahan na graduate sa ani okay kaayo kay kanang kuan siya internationally acknowledged siya, di ba? So kung mo graduate niya mo puhon BTLED mo ato mo gawas acknowledge mo ni graduate mo BTLED. Okay, sad to say there are cases that we don't mention the school nga graduate siya og doctor ikabot dito sa gawas nasod nurse ang iyahang kuan kanang iyang matrabaho Kunya, nurse diri graduate, ikabot dito, domestic helper ang iyang matrabaho because they are not internationally acknowledged. So, mao na siya. So, dapat kayo ipagpasalamat nato sa CTU, di ba? Ana jud. Okay, now high expectations. So, in designing assessment tasks that target the higher level outcomes, design measures that activate higher order thinking skills and are authentic or highly reflective to the real life scenario. So lahi na karon ha, real life scenario ang atong ipanghatag nga example. Dili ta maghatag og example nga wa pa sila kahibaw. Di ba? So for example, mo ana ka nga kanang kita mo sa kuan class kan magihatag ka example nga waterfalls. Hino na raman na diri sa Cebu no. Kanang wala diri sa Cebu. Pyramid. Di ba? Maghatag ka example sa pyramid. Ya picture man in town nang nakitaan sa mga estudyante. Di ba? So muna nga hatag og kuan kana example nga real life scenario nga makita jud nato diri. Like for example, ang cases sa COVID, muna na makita man na nato diri. So those are the things nga pwede nimo mahatag. Unya higher order thinking skills. Ayaw lang knowledge level. Ayaw ko sa knowledge level. Who is the father of blah blah blah? Now, what are the names of the brothers and sisters of Jose Rizal? Diba? Ayaw na ingon ana lang. Pwede nimong butangan, pero butangin pa jud og higher order thinking skills. Like for example, why, how, diba? So muna nga kuan higher order thinking skills. Okay. Next is expanded opportunity. As explained by Spady, all students can learn and succeed, but not on the same day. Tanan makatun, tanan mo successful pero dili pareha og adlaw. In the same way, dili sad pareha og pamaagi. That is why teachers need to provide expanded opportunities for students to profess or demonstrate the learning outcomes. This expanded opportunity may include a time dimension whereby the students may be allowed to do remedial, make-up, or practice tests. Also, the mode in which assessment task is given may be diversified. This is when teachers may consider a varied learning or thinking styles of their students, as well as multiple intelligences. So, naidaghan nga multiple intelligences. Naay mga estudyante nga ganahan magtuon nga naay music. Unya kita nga classmate niya sabaan ta. So mag-headset na lang siya. Naay mga estudyante nga magtuon nga magkitab ang baba. Kita sabaan ta. So ato siyang ipalayo. Yun na yung mga estudyante nga gusto hilom. Edi ikaw ang mupalayo. So mauna nga you should respect one another. Dili tanan pareha og intelligence nga makatun diha dayon. Dili usa ka adlaw lang nakuha na nimo tanan ang itudlo. Na mga classmates nga mabiyaan. Pero naningkamot sad na. Remember, it doesn't matter on how fast you get there. It's the climb. Kung unsa katasa ang imong naabot, bahalag unsa kadugaya. Mo na importante. Ay sa palabi dugay nga kanang next semester na kay magrado man sad ko, di ba? So muna nga okay ra kaayo basta mo bitaw na nga dili na ko ipang-close ang akong mga exam, pero ay sa inyo palabi dugay kay nagsige man sad kuan record ba. Okay, so that is expanded opportunity. As a teacher, you should be lenient at all times to your students. Labi na in this time of pandemic nga kita tanan affected. So dapat maningkamot tatagsa-tagsa. Okay, last is design down. OBE follows the top-down approach to teaching as well as assessment. While traditional education uses the bottom to top down ang gigamit sa OBE, ang traditional is bottom-up approach, where teachers teach concepts, then create quizzes based on these lessons, and lastly, design end-of-term tasks as a measure of the students' learning. In the top-down approach, the teacher begins with the end in mind. He first defines the end result, what he wants his students to demonstrate after the course. Then he designs the final assessment to measure these outcomes, followed by the identification of the teaching learning activities that may be used to help the students achieve these specific outcomes. Again, OBE is top-down and then traditional is bottom-up. Ang sa una, dapat makover na ko, makuha na ko the entire duration of the semester, dapat ka mahatagan ta mag-exam. Unya kung unsay score ninyo, mauto siya. Ang kumpila inyong ihatag na score. Nako, moto inyo ang grado. But in OBE, it's not. We may give you different examinations based on your learning styles. We may give you, because dili tanan pareha og kuan nasabtan. Nay uban maayo kaayo memorization, pero nasa uban maayo analysis. So mao na. In my case, I am better in analysis. But kung mapugos, may sa kay ko memorize. Pero dili kaayo, lesser ko sa memorization than the analysis. So muna siya ang design down. Okay. So I hope nasabtan ninyo ang discussion nato about the education paradigm shift. Meaning, from content sa una, content nga kuanta, mahumato tanan, karon outcomes na. Dapat masabtan sa tanan. And no student should be left behind. And we will gonna start kung asa mudapita nagbarog karon nga kuan learning. So dili ingon nga dapat ato ko magsugod at nya dapat kung asa dapit mahuman dito ko kutob. Dili kung kutob ra ko sa katunga, kutob ra ko 3/4 sa syllabus, then so be it. Because mao man na siya ang ato ang tinutuban nga na-discuss. I guess klaro raman siguro. I'm gonna end my kuan kanang share screen. You may unmute yourselves if you want to. Kuan. By the way, naka-share screen ba ko?
Wala na, sir.
Wala na, sir.
Karon lang bago
Wala,
nawa.
sir. Baguhay ra.
So, do you have any questions that you want to address to me before tamo end sa atong session? Before tamo end sa atong session. Sa kaya naka-alarm din ako ang cellphone.
May question sa sir.
Before tamo end sa atong session, unsa man na may pangutana?
Ang tabihin mo ng OBE top down to sir no nya ang traditional is
Ang OBE is unsa daw ko na to?
Ang OBE is ba to? O then,
Ang OBE
traditional
is top down.
then
Ang traditional
bottom up.
bottom up approach.
bottom up.
Bottom up ang kuan, top down ang usa. Diba? So, muna siya. Pero nakuha rin yung ang concept sa outcomes based karon.
Nasabdan ra.
Sir.
Sir.
Naamoy yung pangutana.
Pong naman na.
Pero,
Sir.
ay mo kabala ka, si Shaira o hinay ko nun yung signal. Siya namin dito. Do not worry because everything is recorded and then I'll gonna upload this in YouTube so that you can recap everything that I had discussed. Diba? So maka-recap kuan. Dako kay ng tabang sa inyo mga maka-recap din mo sa YouTube. Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Okay, sir.
Do you have any questions? Wala. So,
Yes, sir.
kuan kanang mag-update lang niya ako kung kanusa ang inyuhang exam for this na topic. But do not worry because everything is higher order thinking skills. So, based na siya sa unsay inyuhang nakatunan. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so i- if you have